The Centre for Appropriate Technology has been working with remote Indigenous communities for more than 30 years. Peter Taylor, who's with us today, is the CEO, who himself has had 20 years' experience in Indigenous affairs, particularly in remote areas. Would you make him welcome, Peter Taylor?
I'd like to start by actually acknowledging the traditional owners, the Lirartippa people of Central Aranda, who own the land on which we're meeting. Many of them are friends of mine, and I'm very pleased to recognise elders past, present and future and acknowledge their continuing presence in the country that we're currently having these meetings on. I'm here, I think, to talk about Bushlight. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway, I'll launch in. Bushlight is a program of the Centre for Appropriate Technology, which has got its headquarters about 8 kilometres south of the Gap of here. We're a national organisation. We've got offices in Cairns, Darwin and Broome. We're an Aboriginal controlled not-for-profit entity. We've been around for 30 years. Bushlight is a federally funded program to provide renewable energy services to small remote Aboriginal communities who are not typically connected to a grid or serviced by mini-grids operated by mainstream power utilities. For those unfamiliar with the demographics of remote Indigenous Australia, there are around 1,100 remote communities, and only a couple of hundred of those have got populations of a few hundred or more. So the vast majority of Aboriginal population in remote Australia live in absolutely tiny settlements, and that's where Bushlight operates. So Bushlight's been operating for about 10 years. So what I'll cover today, briefly, is what the program looks like now, how we got to be successful as we are in delivering renewables in very remote locations, lessons we learned, ongoing lessons, where we're going, industry and workforce and international impacts. So straight into it. This is what the Bushlight program looks like now. There's a whole bunch of little red and blue dots all over the top half of Central Australia and in Central Australia. Essentially, those are communities that are serviced by Bushlight. There's 220 of them. They range from very remote desert communities a few hundred kilometres south of Alice Springs to Arnhem Land, a few on the Cape in the Gulf, and right across the Kimberley. So 220 communities. The smallest system is about 4 kilowatts. The largest system's about 160, so it's pretty small beer. It's way below what most of you would deal with in your day-to-day lives. But it's what makes sense in the communities that we deal with. Those little amoebas, different colour amoebas you see, those are our network of annually contracted service runs. So we install systems, we work with communities, but we also provide backup through service runs through a contracted program of maintainer installers. And they're all organised regionally through those little amoebas. So, how did Bushlight evolve? I don't know if you can make that out. That's a small-scale renewable energy system. And I don't know what you think, but it looks like shit. We use this as part of a training program for staff coming on board, and essentially the staff member that identifies the 4 areas where someone can electrocute themselves by playing with that system, they get a job. So, but essentially that's what renewable energy systems often looked like in small remote communities before Bushlight came along. So how did it start? Well, it started with research. Small household level renewable energy systems have been installed around remote Australia for decades. In 1999-2000, the Centre for Appropriate Technology that I currently run, and the then Centre for Remote Energy, Australian Cooperative Research Centre for Renewable Energy, responded to a growing anecdotal concern that most of the systems looked a bit like that. So we did a survey. We inspected 134 sites across the country and undertook satisfaction surveys of over 1,500 renewable energy operators, covering remote communities, pastoralists and tourism operators. And what we found was pretty gobsmacking. Incredibly low levels of general satisfaction with the systems. In Aboriginal communities, over 50% of the systems had failed within 2 years. And the key problems that were identified by the site visits was there was no backup for uniquely designed systems. So there were installers running around the country having their own favourite inverters, their own favourite charge controllers, they'd have their own way of putting things together, and no one else did it like them. And when you think about backup, that never works. The other major problem, system performance appeared to be oversold. Installers would go into a community and say, I can give you free power for life. And that's just not true. So people using the systems thought they didn't have to do anything, they didn't have to worry, they didn't have to set aside any money. This system just gave them power for life. And when it stopped after 2 years, they got a bit cranky, understandably. Third major problem, most of the system design that's characterised by this is there's no demand management. As people who work with small-scale renewable energy systems know, one of the critical failures is short battery life. People overuse systems, the batteries run down very quickly. After they do that a couple of times, they die. And unless you protect the batteries through some system of demand management, your energy service life is going to be pretty short. So what did we do? Essentially, we evolved the Bushlight program by using those particular problems as drivers and challenges for us to come up with design solutions. So in terms of renewable energy being poorly understood, we designed a really intensive community education program and an energy budgeting system to inform system design. And I'll come back to that a bit later. For demand management problems, we designed in-house meters that controlled energy use against household budgets that we worked up individually with Aboriginal households. And one of the principal functions of that, apart from embedding DSM thinking in how communities understand energy use, was to protect batteries. Because when you're 2,000 kilometres from anywhere, getting a replacement battery is not easy. So, third major challenge, unique design systems without backup. We standardised massively. There's absolutely no technical innovation in anything that Bushlight has done in terms of componentry or anything. We use industry standard batteries, inverters, chargers, etc. But what we did do, standardise and package them in a way that they were all componentry protected. We established supply chains where we could say, well, if that bit fails, we know where to get more and we can get them quickly. We can get them out there. The community won't have power outages for weeks at a time. So we standardised, established supply chains, and we had to work closely with industry. It was not part of our goal. We never had it in our heads to say we're going to set aside all of the industry players who've stuffed up for so long. And not all of them had, obviously. But we had to work with industry, so we actually harnessed the strengths of industry and brought together what we thought was a much more sustainable solution for remote communities. Energy education. I said that was one of the main things to try and deal with that problem of things being oversold. We developed a whole suite of resources, mostly graphic resources, because most of the communities we work in, English is their third or their fourth language. So we rely on pictures, we rely on a standard set of diagrams. This is a picture of a men's energy planning session at a place called Mulgabore, which is about 300 kilometres northeast of here. A community of about 150 people. Prior to Bushlight, they had no electricity whatsoever. They had several houses, they had a bore, which was actually an old stock bore, it wasn't meant for human consumption. but in the 30 years they'd been there, they'd never had electricity. So we actually spent 6 months in this community giving basic education about what is energy, what are the different kinds of energy, where does it come from. Then taking them through a process of saying, okay, if you understand what energy is, what it can and can't do, what are the different sources, here's renewable energy, do you think you actually want to live and work with that? Because it can't do everything that you think you might want to do with energy. So our energy planning process at a community level can be really extensive, up to 6 months, as I said. We sit down with women, we sit down with men, we sit down with kids, we sit down with the whole community. Essentially we work up what we call household energy budgets. It even gets down to that level. So I think this is Margaret's house. Margaret's house, a resident in Mulgabore. And essentially it maps out all of her energy use for the whole house. It gives you a picture of what it looks like in summer, what it looks like in winter, and the seasonal variation, which is reflected on your left-hand side, is important because that helps us with designing system capacity. So it's not just letting the resident know that things will be up and down during the year, but we can design a system that will cope with that seasonal fluctuation. So these slides will be coming out with, I presume, with a conference package, so you can look at the micro detail when you want. I mentioned battery protection. This is the heart and soul of the Bushlight system. It's called an energy management unit, and every Bushlight household has this in their house. It's a little box that tells communities what their energy budget is on a day-to-day basis, and typically the kinds of systems that we design will give each household about 8 or 9 kilowatt hours a day to live with, which is about a third of what you and I live with in suburban Australia. So nice little bank of green lights. They all light up at 12 o'clock at midday. They've got a full budget. As they use it, the lights drop out, and it gets down to yellow. At yellow, because, as per the next slide, we've set up the household around multiple circuits, we can ensure that once people drain down their energy budget, they don't lose critical function like refrigeration or safety lighting or whatever. So they can play all they like with Game Boys, or they can watch TV, or they can do whatever they like, but the system is designed so that if they've got medicine, if they've got food in their fridge, it's always cold. And if there's snakes around the house, we've got safety lighting in place so that people can see where they're going in dusk and dark. So we've got a whole range of fail-safe mechanisms built in to ensure that a very basic level of amenity is always provided. The other benefit, I guess, of the energy management unit meter is it really embeds thinking. People think, I've got an energy budget for today. Okay, I'm going to stop the kids watching TV now because I want to do something in 2 hours' time. They start to plan their day and they think more creatively about how they're going to get the best out of what is admittedly a very limited energy budget. Okay. So that's all the separate circuitry to secure different critical functions within the household. One of the real strengths of Bushlight is we actually designed a communication strategy around energy concepts and energy management from the get-go. So these little blue sun symbols, they're the sun symbols that we use to start from the very point of the beginning of our consultation with communities to explain energy concepts. And we use the same symbols throughout to the point where we're training people about how to manage their system 6, 12 months, 24 months down the track. So we've got a very consistent non-language based communication tool so that people understand what they're doing with their energy and what it means. It took us probably about 18 months to pull together a consistent communication tool of that kind. Trial and error. and a lot of community feedback for which we can never be grateful enough. And so just to emphasise the point, we don't set that little blue box up as the bogey person. We explain to people that it's actually part of their creative management of their daily life, and particularly we emphasise to them it's there to actually protect their system, to make sure that their batteries. So there's probably lots and lots of communities in remote Australia who have got a much better understanding of battery life and the critical importance of it for their energy sources than other people who use solar in urban areas. So people understand in most of the communities we work in that they have a daily budget because it's about the long-term 20-year life cycle of their system. And just to show you that we're not touchy-feely anthropologists, we actually do very intensive life cycle costings for renewable energy investments compared to a range of other sources. So we do take a 20-year life cycle, which is not atypical, and we compare it to full-time diesel. So if you were running a diesel system to give you 24-hour power, which is what Bushlight does, we'll do your costing against that. A lot of communities who are on diesel run diesel 6 hours a day and they live on 6 hours power a day. We do some life cycle costings against that scenario. And it's only when those kinds of figures stack up do we sit down with the committee and say, do you want to make a serious choice to opt for renewable energy? Because it won't do everything. It won't run three-phase. It won't run power tools. You're going to have to find other ways to deal with that. But it will give you basic services and it will enable you to do a whole range of things that you can't do if you're reliant on intermittent power source. So that data just turned into a graph. So the Bushlight line is the sort of darky one that runs along the $500,000 mark. And you'll see a tiny little spike right at the end of the 20-year period, which is leading up to battery replacement period. The lovely juicy pink dotted line is 24-hour diesel. And since that graph is done, it's probably sort of gotten a little bit steeper, and it'll only get steeper yet. So at various 8-year and 14-year points, we think we've demonstrated life cycle benefit from an upfront capital investment in renewables for these particular communities. And I think to date we've had to replace one battery in 10 years. So we've achieved a remarkable level of performance. This next slide is just there for the hell of it. There's some organisations in this room who get to play with very big machinery. I just wanted to say we get to play with some sort of medium-sized machinery. This is us hauling the components of a Bushlight system across a normal little creek on Arnhem Land. And that's the only way you can get them there. So our staff have to work in pretty odd conditions. We'd use contractors to do this sort of stuff, but just about all of the major processes of transport and install are supervised by our staff. So we have a lot of people in the field a lot of the time. And voila, that's that same equipment installed 10 days later. When you're hauling that amount of gear out to a remote area, if you don't do it in 10 days, you're stuffed. And just to let my pride get away with me for a minute, it's gravelled, it's fenced, there's no weeds, it's fire protected. All of the features that will make it safe and secure for, as long as possible in place within 10 days, as well as the wiring, rock solid installation. Arnhem Land, it has to be cyclone rated. So we manage logistically incredibly well to get that complex bit of machinery out to that location and to install it in a way that where we know it's going to last for 20 years. And another point of pride, that is probably the neatest battery bank I've ever seen in a mini grid connected renewable energy system. One of the things that we've done in terms of working with industry is we've incrementally raised some of the technical design standards that installers work with. Most people were sort of compliant with industry standards. We found that in remote areas they didn't cut it. You know, the things like cockatoos and various other creeply crawlies that would get into things. So we had to redesign standards on wiring, on casings, the kind of protection that's provided, how thermal amenity or thermal control was provided for the storage areas. We redesigned all those standards quite substantially and have worked creatively in workshops with industry to make it comfortable for industry to understand why they need to do that in places like Arnhem Land and Derby and Gove Peninsula and Dampier Peninsula and Cape York and wherever. So every contractor that we work with has got a manual which we generate and which they know backwards, hopefully, otherwise they get the sack. And they all meet the same technical standards that are relevant to those particular geographic locations. How am I going for time? 5? Okay. I guess the other quick thing on industry, because I did say I'd talk about industry. So yes, we've been working with installers and SMEs who work in the small-scale RE system for quite a while in a very supportive and constructive way. We've also partnered with a couple of major componentry suppliers. Sage, I think someone from Sage was in the audience around somewhere. We've been buying stuff from them for 8 years. And it's, as I said, given the problems that were identified in 2000, having consistent suppliers and a supply chain that we know that can be delivered in remote areas is absolutely critical to getting the lights on in 200 and 220 communities around Australia. Okay. And one of the other things we do is we do refresher visits to communities. So every 12 months a community will get visited. They'll be reminded about all the local things they need to do about washing panels, keeping weeds away from some of the infrastructure, given refresher courses on troubleshooting, that energy management meter that I mentioned before. It's fairly intuitive to read. With minimal amounts of training, a non-literate person with at least some basic technical skills can ring somebody and say, I think there's a problem with my system because this light is flashing. That probably means that the hybrid interface is overriding what I'm doing and I need help, I need an electrician. So they can't fix it themselves, but they can interpret the problem and know where to go. And keeping that kind of up on an annual basis is absolutely critical to the long-term life cycle sustainability of these systems. 2 minutes? Okay. I'll jump ahead. So we have also been doing stuff on workforce development. We've developed a remote a RAPS Cert 2, that's typo, remote area power supply Cert 2, delivered it in 3 locations to Aboriginal communities around the country. It's an incredibly demanding course. For kids from the bush, you need Year 10 literacy and numeracy. Our first version of that required 700 hours of contact hours of learning, which is pretty extraordinary for a Cert 2. But that's what these kids go through to have a shot at getting into the small-scale RE systems industry. We're still working on that one. I think one of the things we're also pretty proud about is all of the benefits that we've learnt, the strengths of our general design philosophy, our approach to delivering energy services has now positioned us to actually move internationally. So CAT as an organisation is as I said, Aboriginal not-for-profit. And our constitution actually focuses on the needs of Aboriginal people. So a few years ago we set up a subsidiary company that now is doing international development work in India, Cook Islands. We're in discussions with the Asian Development Bank on another set of projects in Southeast Asia. We're retrofitting the University of New South Wales in terms of sustainability of their buildings. So this is, if you go back, if you remember that early slide of a community education and planning project at Mulgabor up the road here, this is a version of that in Maliagon in Orissa in India. The other thing we love, apart from working productively with communities, we love awards. And Bushlight has won quite a number of engineering excellence awards. I don't want to boast, but the Indian project that you can see a snapshot in front of you won the highest award possible for Engineers Australia Excellence Awards, the Sir William Hudson Award late last year. It beat major infrastructure projects worth billions of dollars, including INPEX in Darwin. We couldn't be prouder. That'll do.